In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said it was good. And from our beginnings as people of faith, we've recognized that we're connected to all of God's creation.
Without the kind of view we have of the earth today from outer space, still people 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 years ago had enough of a sense of this planet that they could convey not only their awe and wonder about it, but also see that it was all highly ordered and highly integrated.
We read, "Let there be light." We read about the firmament. We read about the waters under heaven. We read about every living creature. And all of these are involved in an intricate interaction. When God says creation is good, God is describing the intricate, balanced interrelationship of the light and the air and the waters and the creatures that actually constitute the climate.
The phrase that God saw that it was good is repeated throughout the whole first narrative of creation. And in fact, it appears 6 times before human beings are ever created, which, I think suggests that other creatures are valued by God, independent of their utility to human beings.
And God tells us, "I will establish my covenant between me and you and every living creature for perpetual generations." And that covenant calls us to a special responsibility.
The Genesis story, of course, moves in its final days to the creation of humankind, uniquely created in God's image, with a unique role of stewardship, caring, tilling and tending the garden is biblical language. It's not dominion understood as domination. It's dominion understood as the appropriate use of our unique gifts in the image of God.
In other words, dominion does not mean abusive use. It means earth keeping. It means creature keeping. We, as good stewards of the creation, are obligated not to destroy that over which we have been given dominion.
If we are a part of a redeemed creation, then it simply makes no sense. In fact, it flies in the face of any sort of reason to think that we are entitled to abuse the creation.
But through our disobedience, we poisoned God's garden, abused God's handicraft, and now are actually altering the climate of God's creation on earth.
For a long time, we've been burning fossil fuels, coal, gas, oil, to drive our national and global economies, and the byproduct is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide exists naturally in the atmosphere, and we are adding more of it.
The greenhouse gases have always been in the atmosphere and actually allow life on Earth. But unfortunately, the human activities since the Industrial Revolution pumped into the atmosphere too many greenhouse gases and made too much of a good thing.
The major causes are our incredible addiction to gasoline and automobiles and our reliance on fossil fuels for most of our power plants, our electricity, everything that we do.
We have a population growth, a demand for energy that has a certain momentum to it that is virtually guaranteeing that we will have a doubling of carbon dioxide over the pre-industrial levels. When that happens, we expect certain things to happen to the climate.
And what we're beginning to see in the last 100 years is a more intense disruption, a more rapid change in weather patterns than scientists have ever been able to observe over the past roughly 10,000 years.
It is occurring, and the scientists all over the world agree on that. The scientific uncertainties are on details and on how to deal with that, but not on the fact that global warming exists or not exists. They all agree that it does.
God's law teaches us that we reap what we sow. And scientists tell us that the consequences of a changing climate will be profound.
We expect the summertime heat index to be substantially higher than it is today. In places like Washington, D.C. or New Orleans or Tallahassee or Atlanta, this is already a big effect.
In some parts of the world, arable land may be completely wiped out by drought, and entire villages, entire communities, entire regions may not be able to engage in the same sort of agricultural practices that they had been engaged in for 10,000 years.
And all of God's creation is vulnerable to this assault: the air, the land, and life upon it, even the waters.
But we expect sea level to rise merely because as the climate warms, the ocean gets warmer. And water that's warmer occupies more volume. A place like New York City wouldn't be affected very much because it is a place that can expend as much money as it possibly needs to protect its environment. But things like the barrier islands off the east coast of the United States, all of the Everglades, a lot of big cypress swamp will literally disappear.
As it afflicts God's creation, climate change offends God's justice.
Global warming has its greatest impact on those least likely to be able to do anything about it. The poor, the marginal, the indigenous, the tribal, the underdeveloped.
My biggest fear is to disappear. If global warming continues like this, our island will last for about 50 years. Our homes and our culture, everything that used to belong to us would no longer be there.
These are cultures that have been here for longer than the Anglo-Saxons have inhabited England or the Germanic Slavics have inhabited Europe. And they have lived for all of that time on their island in harmony with their environment, with their own traditions, with their own knowledge. It's really pretty much of a global treasure, and it is seriously under threat.
Along with rising seas, scientists predict more severe and violent storms.
One of the things we expect to happen is because the oceans are warmer, there will be even more water in the air. And we expect hurricanes to become more intense on the average than they are now, simply because hurricanes are driven by this extra amount of water vapor in the air. It's extra fuel for them.
They already say that they're seeing more frequent and more severe cyclones in some parts, and that's frightening, because if you're on a very small island and the wind and the waves are howling over you, you can't get into a car and retreat like you can on the Florida Keys. You've got nowhere to go.
2 years ago, we had a very severe cyclone which hit 2 islands in the northern group and which displaced almost the entire population. These islands are very small, and so there are waves which are sort of covering the entire island, yeah.
These are God's children, the least of these. They are the elderly, who suffer from heat waves in cities. They are the poor, who are more vulnerable to disease.
As you have warming and the areas of the earth that are seen as tropical, as those areas expand both north and south, the diseases that are usually seen in those areas start expanding. So communities and societies that had never been exposed to dengue fever or malaria will suddenly, within a generation or less, become exposed to them.
The underdeveloped countries have less resources to put into combating disease in general and less resources to put into their public health programs and their public health infrastructure. They're also combating a huge epidemic now of HIV/AIDS, so the resources that they would otherwise put into combating diseases like malaria, dengue, schistosomiasis, diseases that are spread by insects and other kinds of animals, are diverted away from those kinds of programs.
We're creating a situation that will eventually bring untold suffering to millions of human beings and to unknown number of species throughout the world.
We know now what we didn't know before. We know the damage we're causing, and we know the consequences of our actions. And I think that changes the situation greatly in terms of the ethical nature of the dilemmas we're facing.
God's love offers redemption, the chance to change our course, and the chance to renew the face of the earth.
We really have to save the creation and we have to save the planet. And we can only do that if we feel that it is a unitary goal, that we all have something at stake here.
Within the faith community, responses to these natural disasters are part of what we call our acts of mercy. And we're very good at it. As a community, acts of mercy are something that comes almost second nature to us. But also what, as a community of faith, we need to respond to is what we call acts of justice. And that is preventing the disaster from occurring in the first place.
We read in Luke, "To whom much is given, of him much will be required." With only 4% of the world's population, our nation contributes almost a quarter of the world's greenhouse gases. Other countries have to make a contribution, but ours is a responsibility for leadership.
We are called to be stewards of the earth, and that is part of my faith commitment, is part of my faith journey, that this must be an important part of it, that I must take it very seriously.
As local congregations, we have something very important to say to one another, but also to the larger world.
Churches, when they bind together, can rise up and say, we stand collectively together on these issues. And it's not just Christians. The Jewish community, the Muslim community, those who cut across the variety of religious traditions, linking arms and saying, we have a creative God who created the world in which we live, who is calling us to act as one together. That's a powerful voice and a powerful statement.
Once we really feel in our hearts that there's an essential relationship here with God and God's creation, once we really own it, then comes the moment of truth. The lights we do or do not turn on, the cars we choose to buy or not to buy, the buildings we choose to insulate or not.
I think God's calling us to clean up our act and clean our water, clean our air, and protect our environment. This is a religious issue, and we have to find ways to remind the person in the pew that not only is this an important issue, but this is an issue that God calls us to address.
Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, who was the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Palestine, wrote a beautiful poem called A Fourfold Song, which he talks about how every person's life is ultimately a song that they sing. And some people sing a song of only their own individual self. And some people's life is a song of their own people. And some people sing a threefold song, which is a song of humanity. And some people sing a fourfold song, which is a song of all creation. And he said it's that fourfold song in which the song of the self, the song of the people, the song of humankind, and the song of the world are merged at all times. That's what we need to be singing.
We read in Psalms, "Yours is the day, and yours is the night. You made summer and winter." By protecting God's climate, we serve our Creator. Together we can sing, "Let the earth bless the Lord. Praise and exalt the Lord forever."